Hi, and welcome to The Curling Show, the podcast that brings you interviews with the sport's top athletes and the people who shape the game. Supported by listeners like Jason Thomas of Mississauga, Ontario, who made a secure donation to this effort at thecurlingshow.com. I'm Dean Gemmell, and this edition is part one of a conversation with one of those coaches from Canada who works with teams that aren't. The coach of China's curling teams, but the pride of Lachine, Quebec, Dan Rafael. Welcome to the Curling Show.
Thanks, Dean. Thanks for having me on, finally.
Yeah, finally we've made it work. Your schedule is such that it has been difficult to connect. You got a lot of responsibilities with in your Team China role. Speaking of that, the list of famous curling coaches is short, and in a relatively short amount of time, you've made your way onto it as a coach of the teams from China. How did this whole venture with that country start?
Well, actually, the answer I give everybody is right place at the right time. I was in Boucherville in September 2007, and I was helping Guy Hemmings and Bill Cheerhart, who's with the Canadian Curling Association. They were giving high-performance camp for juniors, and originally the Chinese had asked Bill to go out to Edmonton at the Saville Center to help them work out. And obviously, Bill being with the CCA, I guess he couldn't accept the job, or he just couldn't do it. And while I was driving him to the airport, he asked me if I would be interested, and the rest is history.
So there you go. Like a lot of things, I guess, right place at the right time in life, isn't it?
Good things come to those who wait, I guess.
Well, yeah. Showing up is half of it, I think, right? That's half of success is showing up, or 90% probably. The other 10% is staying awake, I think. But
well, actually, the weekend of the high performance camp, I should have been coaching my Canadian team, Eve Delille, who was playing out in Trois-Rivières. And I told him, I said, look, I'd already committed to the high performance camp, so I'll be away for the weekend. And the funny part to that story is, now Bill coaches my old Canadian team part-time. So
little did they know when you went to that camp that they were going to lose their coach as a result, too. And
well, who knows?
Let's start with talking about the season, this past season for the Chinese teams. Certainly Binyu Wang had a big win. That was probably the highlight. The men's team certainly struggled in Moncton, and mixed doubles, I guess, was a bit of a mixed bag. What are your thoughts on the season just passed?
Well, from what I gathered from last year, I knew I was going to have a little bit more facility with the women's team, only because of the language barrier. The skip of the women's team and the coach of the women's team, the direct coach, their old coach, they both speak English, so it's a little bit easier to get things done, and you're always sort of moving ahead, whereas with the men's team, the men's coach speaks no English, and the players just enough to get by. So I think that really put a damper on what the men did. I guess the training procedures also. A lot of times I'm with the women at a certain event, or as you know, the women's world is before the men, so I spend a lot of time with the women, and then I meet up with the men, and a lot of times it just doesn't work out.
Yeah, you talk about a language barrier with the men's team that's bigger than with the women's team. I don't know how you say it in Mandarin or Cantonese, but you really gave them a dressing down in the media after one of their games. I think we'd call it ripping them a new one in English, actually. But did they get that, or is that just something that really you're saying to the papers and they're not even getting?
Actually, somebody I ran into the next day as I was heading to the next game, they said, wow, that was quite the interview yesterday. And it was one of those, what we call a blackout interview. I was just walking off from a very, very frustrating game, and an interview just stuck the microphone in my face, and I just let it all spill out, which I usually do anyway, but that's just the way I am. But I think they did understand. A lot of people in their group will translate for them. But what happened in Moncton really was just a little bit of frustration that you train this team all year. They play in world-class events. These are not club curlers that play through the ranks and play at regionals and provincials. These are national athletes that go to national events all the time. They play in the Pacifics. They play at Continental Cup. Continental Cup is a big event, and they have absolutely no problem. And then all of a sudden, the skip shows up at the Worlds in Moncton and loses his cool. He just cracked. So we had to make the change.
Is that a lineup change that you'll stick with next year?
We're going to discuss it when I go back to China next month, but it sort of worked out for us because the third, Liu Ray, he's probably one of the best shooters right now in China. I mean, on a consistent basis. He will make all the shots. He just doesn't have the personality or the makeup to be a skip of a team. He's not really a leader. So, until we address that situation, then, we probably will stick with that lineup.
My understanding of it, but I've never been able to ask you about it, is that the athletes who curl were part of China's sports system, and were athletes in other sports, and then we're sort of pushed to curling. Is that the case?
Well, I don't know the story for all the athletes, but for the ones that I do know of, because curling is so new in China, yes, they do have to find athletes that are willing to play the sport, or just find people in general that are willing to play the game. I know Betty Bing Yuang, she originally tried hockey because her father is a hockey coach in China, and she didn't like it that much. I don't know if it was because of the contact or the more of a physical game. She then turned to curling. Her dad said, well, why don't you try curling then? And she loved it, so she stuck with that. As far as I know, the three other members on the women's team are originally speed skaters. So they're all from basically the Harbin Sports School. And the men, I think, are along the same lines. I think there are 3 out of 4 that are ex-speed skaters on that team.
Okay.
Long track.
You say Ray Liu is one of the best shooters in China. How many shooters are there in China?
Probably not as many as we'd like at this point. I'd probably say less than 100.
Okay.
But there are a lot more good curlers than people think. Like, a lot of people think these 8 or 10 athletes that we show up with are probably the best we have. Yes and no. There are other players that could probably take the place of some of the players we have in short notice. But I ran the selection games this past summer and helped with national games in Changchun just before the World University Games. And I was quite surprised at the amount of talented players that there are in the country.
Hey, that's an interesting point. I would have thought, we're looking at the best players, but I guess with 100 players, if you're going to be into curling in China, you're probably not in it for the Friday night mixed, are you?
Oh, probably not, because the lack of curling facilities starts to play.
Right.
There are just no curling facilities. There are a few, and there are some that are being built, but there are just not enough at this time to say that there are going to be a lot of club curlers, so to speak. Right now, they play a lot in arena facilities that they turn into curling rinks, and that's what they have to do, to move on. But interesting story is that after the gold medal win by the women's team in the World University Games, this is before we won the World Championship. After we won the gold at the World University Games, I was told that the Chinese government accepted to finance the building of a six-sheet training facility.
So that's being built, a six-sheet club or a six-sheet facility, whatever we want to call it. That's
my understanding is that it's a six-sheet facility readily being able to be turned into a hockey facility.
Okay.
On short notice. So, if 10 years down the road, curling is just not as popular as they'd like it to be, they can turn it into a hockey rink.
Built with a hedge.
Yeah, pretty well.
Hey, this talk about the number of curlers and facilities in China leads into this discussion, and that's the concern among, I think, many Canadians that, there might be a day when the men's and women's world championships are won by China, and they're countries without a club curling background. And there have been some, including Ray Turnbull, who have opined that perhaps Canadians shouldn't be coaching teams like China. How do you respond to those concerns?
Well, actually, when I first heard that comment wasn't when he made it in Vernon, was actually when I got to Grand Fort. And I was quite surprised at the comment, especially the fact that who it was coming from. If I'm not mistaken, Ray Turnbull is one of the first people that went to Asia to push the game of curling. So,
I would agree. The source of it was a bit unusual.
Well, I mean that's television. I mean, they're going to say stuff just to get a reaction, and of course, newspaper people are going to try to get some print out of you also. So, a lot of comments are made, not so much Ray Turnbull's comment, but a lot of the comments that I am getting are actually made out of ignorance. I mean, a lot of people just don't know some of the things that are going on in curling right now. I mean, you're talking about Canadians coaching Chinese. I mean, my first experience at the Pacific Curling Championships 2 years ago, out of 6 countries, 5 were coached by Canadians. You look at the Worlds last year, nobody said boo about Russ Howard coaching Switzerland. It's...
Which leads me to ask you, do you think really a lot of this, a lot of the concern about you and coaching China is based not so much on curling, but the fact that I think China, as a country in general, unsettles people right now, and we see how dominant they are in manufacturing. They're becoming certainly holding a lot of cards when it comes to global economics and everything else. Do you think that's what a lot of it is based on?
I think so. I think that's a pretty accurate comment, only because, like I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of teams that are coached by Canadians and have been for a long time. You look at, Earl Morris has been with Australia for years and years.
Ed Lukowicz with the United States.
Ed Lukowicz with the U.S., that's correct.
Ray Turnbull coached Igor Ramsfeld, didn't he? Trained him years
Ray
ago.
Turnbull has not coached, that we not know of,
Right.
But, no, I think when this first started coming about, comments that I started to make to people, and I don't mean it in a bad way, but it's just when Canada and other countries also, but mostly Canada, wanted curling to become an Olympic sport, I think what they wanted to have their cake and eat it too. And what I mean by that is they just didn't put a lot of thought process into the fact that if it does become an Olympic sport, what are the repercussions? What's going to happen? What are other countries going to do once it's an Olympic sport? And I think you're seeing it right now is because it's an Olympic sport, China is investing a lot of money into the athletes that they're sending out, and they're trying to be successful.
Yeah, I mean, that ship has sailed too. I mean, there's no, getting the horses back in the barn to load one cliche on top of another.
No.
But what about the way I understood it this year was that your teams weren't allowed to train at the Saville Center. Is that true?
Well, yeah, but that's another one of those stories that gets out as we were kicked out of the Saville Center.
Yeah, so clarify it for me, because I've
Yeah.
probably said on this show that you were kicked out.
Well, that's basically not what happened, because as you well know now, the Saville Center is also a national training center for the Canadian teams that are in line for the Olympics. So the last thing you need is, especially if you're getting funding from the Canadian government, the last thing you need is for somebody to walk in and go, how come the Chinese are training in a national training center? So we were just politely told, listen, you can't come here anymore. And Rob Krebs, who is also the manager at the Saville Center, as far as I know, he was helpful enough to find us another place to train, and now we train in Leduc instead.
So what happens when Team China wanders around in Leduc?
Actually, they love us in Leduc.
Loved in Leduc. That's like I'm big in Winnipeg.
Yeah, it just, I don't know, it just depends where we go, but a lot of the places we go to, we're greeted with open arms, where they just love seeing the Chinese teams. They love the way they play. They just like the fact that Chinines are actually getting involved in the sport that they love.
I think the way you explain it, the decision to not be allowed to train at the Saville Center does make sense. You're talking about government dollars going to a facility, and it should be for the Canadian teams. And then when you explain that Rob helped you find another place, it makes sense too.
Absolutely. I mean, a good example of that is the training facility that we had in Huairou, which is a district of Beijing. It's the six-sheet facility, but it's privately owned. The building is owned by a certain individual, but all the rocks and the ice scrapers and the dehumidifiers, all the machinery that's in there is owned by the Chinese Curling Association. And while we were out in Kurosawa to play in the Kurosawa International, once we returned, we walked in to train one day, and the Koreans were in there training. And that didn't hit too well. I mean, it didn't bother me any, because it's not like we had cameras in there and special setups, much like they do now in the Saville Center.
But the chairman was not pleased.
No, the two coaches were very unhappy, to the point that we actually all walked out. I mean, I didn't, because I didn't know what was going on. But I followed them out, and I was explaining that the coaches were unhappy with the fact that we were going into practice, and the Koreans were in there practicing on the other sheet. So it's much the same thing. I mean, the Olympics are a serious game. A lot of countries put a lot of money into it, and there's certain things that don't want seen or don't want to do in front of other teams.
I agree. The Olympics have become this serious thing. I think they've helped curling immensely. Although I do wish every country would go back and look at Coubertin's original aims for the Olympics. I think we're also medal hungry. It drives me a bit mad these days. But hey,
oh, absolutely, I agree. But
well, yeah, again, that's another one. There's just no stopping it right now. It's become this case where nations are suddenly measuring their own self-worth by the number of medals they get. And it's to me, it's out of hand right now. I mean, I love the stakes of the Olympics, but I think we need a little wake-up call on it.
Yeah, don't get me wrong. I mean, I'm not defending the Chinese position. I mean, right now, I'm basically doing a job that I love, whether it's for China or, it could be the Japanese, could be the Swiss, could be anybody else. But, I'm paid to be a national coach for a country. And, until they do something I disagree with, I'll probably be with them. But, I'm not going to defend their philosophies. It's just I guess that's the way they think is, look, we have a chance to win a medal, whether it's gold or not, at the Olympics. Who cares if we have 100 or 20 curlers, as long as we win.
Right. Hey, they're not alone among countries in that notion either.
No, well, this is the other aspect where, a lot of people started going on about, well, these are the only teams in China. Well, like I said earlier, there's a lot of curlers in China, that are just as talented, just as qualified to play on the team. It's just we only have 5 spots, and that's what we go with. But for how many years did you see Sweden, represented by Heya Lindholm? How many years was Keith Wendorf, representative of Germany, way back when? And I could go on and on and on. I mean, you see a lot of the European countries that don't have the depth, and they're represented year after year after year by the same team, and nobody ever said boo.
Oh, Scotland or Great Britain in the Olympics.
Very, very good example. That's correct. But the reason Canada is not always represented by the same team is, we've got like 1 million curlers in this country.
Yeah, and great, and a ton of depth.
A ton of depth. Yeah, anybody can win on any given day.
That's part 1 of our interview with Dan Rafael on The Curling Show. Remember, even the off-season is a fine time of year to join the Curling Show group on Facebook or to make a small donation to this podcast at thecurlingshow.com. As always, thanks for listening.
Don't you know it's hard for me to see things that I cannot find? How can I tell if it's a dream or just all in my mind?